in progress. So we're going to do some series about what people even need to understand about getting healthier, fitter, stronger, leaner, whilst maintaining cognitive performance, because that would be essential for myself, David. So we're probably going to shoot some intro about who the hell are we at some point. But we're going to just get to points that what is diagnostics and what you need to run to even acknowledge if you're healthy or not, because more often than not, every time I work with people, I don't know how it is for you, but I feel like people go, yeah, what do I need to do a blood test? And I'm like, do you ever need to go and check your car? You right. Don't need to, but it's really, really good if you do.
Absolutely.
Because you never know when it's gonna pack in, and just getting that checkup is gonna extend expectancy of life for whatever health unit you use or for yourself. And why is this all started? Because I picked up this book by Tony Robbins, Life Force, brand new book, and he's talking about improving your quality of life and listing on all these things about that is predominantly used in athletes, like growth hormone, BPC 157, MK 677, metformin, and so on and so forth. So all that might seem like, yeah, it's an overkill, but or some people usually have some kind of prejudice, like, yeah, but it's not natural. And at the same time, they take in painkillers that literally ruins their health. It's like
or drinking about 7 cups of coffee throughout the day to keep up with their workload or something along those lines. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
It's the same thing. So yeah, one of the main things that I like to do to start with anybody, like, and I do this as a service, a standalone service, is just blood work review for anybody, even general population people. It doesn't have to be athletes. And we start with just a main metabolic panel and a main chemistry panel, all their sex hormones, and all of their thyroid hormones.
If you can get very basic, doesn't it? So before I even discuss that, would you go any further before knowing all that? Because I see a lot of people doing genetic testing, they're doing intolerance tests, this and that.
Yeah. So that's a perfect thing, because I see the same thing. Everybody's asking me, oh, well, what about this and what about that? Do I need to go get tested for celiac disease and all kinds of stuff, right? Because they're coming with some kind of an issue, right? My stomach doesn't really agree with me, or hey, I get tired too easy, or whatever, whatever the thing. And so they're talking about a million tests, and I'm like, no. If you haven't gotten this basic blood work done, we need to get that done, because you can uncover a lot of stuff with that. In fact, just literally yesterday, I had somebody who just recently, I wouldn't consider him like a really high-end performer in physicalness, right? So he's not an athlete, right? But he does like to stay active. He does like to be muscular, but he is a business professional, number one, right? So he owns 2 businesses. They're physical businesses, so like a movie theater and 3 businesses. So he owns a gym, a movie theater, and almost like a DoorDash service for people. And so he's handling quite a bit there. And so he started on a little bit of growth hormone, a little bit of testosterone, on his own. He came to me already doing this. Okay. And so I'm like, well, he's like, so, how do I go about like making sure that I'm doing things right? So, and this is common. Everybody starts something or starts taking something or whatever. It can be herbs or pharmaceuticals, like we're talking about.
How do I do it right?
And then after, while they're doing it, they're like, how do I do this right? I'm like, well, okay, so what do you have for blood work? Well, I haven't gotten any blood work. I'm like, oh shit, okay. So let's start there. I'm like, you kind of already stepped in shit a little bit because you're already doing something. So our blood work's going to be a little bit skewed. And sure enough, I get the blood work back. And again, it's the same type of stuff. Just a basic metabolic panel, a basic blood chemistry panel, and then all his sex hormones and all his thyroid hormones. And that basically covers everything as far as like the main things we wanted to look at. The thyroid's going to look at like metabolism and how he's working internally, like fast or slow, kind of a little bit deciphering that. The metabolic panel and the chemistry panel start to tell us actual health markers. And I do have everybody get their vitamin D test in North America just because we're in the upper end of the atmosphere. I'm sure it's about the same in the UK.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, you
And
definitely
then
need to do that in UK. There is no sun.
right, right. And so there's the vitamin D also gets put in there, and insulin resistance, right? So we'll get his glucose, his A1C, and his fasted insulin. So now you can start to be like, okay, his carbohydrate processing is going well or bad. His thyroid is metabolism is going well or bad. And then the thing that stood out for me, especially if you're going to be running a little bit of testosterone or anything that makes you a little bit more muscular, you're going to have red blood cell hematocrit. That's what the first place I go look. And then 9 times out of 10, their hematocrit, and his was a little off. His hematocrit was a little higher than I'd like, but his hemoglobin and red blood cell count was just at the upper end, which was perfect. That's performance, right?
Yeah.
And then immediately I go, okay, your hematocrit's a little high. Let's look at your electrolytes, right? Sure enough, he's holding sodium. His sodium is pegged at the upper end of the scale. And I go, how much water do you drink? And he goes, I don't really drink very much water. I'm like, well, that's a problem. That's probably why your hematocrit's so skewed compared to your red blood cells. And I can tell that your body's trying to hold on to water because it's holding on to sodium. Sodium brings water into cells. I'm like, if you had plenty of water, you wouldn't be holding sodium. You would just freely let go of it. And I go, we need you to drink at least a gallon of water if you're not even close. He's like, oh yeah, I maybe drink a liter. And he goes,
Yeah.
I'm like, yeah. And
So
then
this
sure
is
enough,
where you probably go from your diagnostics point of view. You go, hey, we're going to do a blood test, but we're going to do a blood test review as an interview instead of me telling you, hey, I think this is right and wrong.
exactly right. Yeah. I'm glad you brought that up because I don't do blood tests where I just like see their blood work and then recommend a bunch of shit. I get their blood work and I go through it live like I'm talking to you right now.
Yeah.
So that way I can ask questions right away of like, hey,
You can uncover so much by
yes,
just
100%. And that makes the process more interactive for them. It gets more buy-in. It makes them actually understand, because if they don't understand it, I just back right up and I go, okay, do you understand that or not?
Yeah.
Because another thing that we uncovered was he has a hard time putting on muscle, even though he's taking some testosterone, which, automatically a coach would be like, oh, you're not eating enough food. And I go, okay, well, do you tend to get lean really easy too? He goes, not really. I kind of stay the same. And so then I go, okay, so maybe that has to do with your aerobic capacity, right? Maybe you're just not liberating body fat and utilizing it correctly. What's the determining factor there? And that's oxygen. Are you exchanging oxygen? So I go and I look at his red blood cell count is, a little bit high and his hemoglobin is high. So that means his oxygen carrying capacity is good. But just because your blood carries oxygen doesn't mean that you're utilizing it. So then I go to his his CO2 in his blood, and it's low, like almost at the bottom of the range, like pegged low. I'm like, oh, you can't because when you breathe, it's not because you're lacking oxygen, it's because you're building up carbon dioxide. Elite athletes can stand a lot of carbon dioxide. So you'll see their carbon dioxide number actually opposite. It'll be really high. And the reason for that is because chemically, oxygen has to be exchanged for carbon dioxide at the cellular level. And if your carbon dioxide is low, that means when you do breathe, you exchange very little oxygen for carbon dioxide. I'm like, how much aerobic?
How someone random person checks that? Would you get them one of those things from Amazon, or do you do a blood test on that separately, or?
So no, the carbon dioxide number comes in your basic metabolic panel.
Yeah.
So that's the easiest, and it's really, really cheap in America. It's $20 to get just the basic metabolic panel. Yeah. So if you and that'll give you basic stuff like your semi-liver enzymes, all your cholesterols, and your electrolytes. It tests your EGFR and your glucose. So even just the basic metabolic panel that costs $20 covers a lot there, and it does have the CO2 number, but it won't have your red blood cells. That's the complete blood cell count. So that's why I say you got to get kind of these two little things, because it starts giving us all the clues, all the puzzle pieces start to fit together.
Was he trying to gain muscle and whatnot? Because usually people go like, "What do you mean? I need to start getting fitter. I'm not going to be able to build more muscle because."
That's it. Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what the conversation then dovetailed into. So I go, okay, so what are you doing for aerobic work? He's like, I don't do any. I'm like, well, I can see that because your carbon dioxide number is so low. I'm like, you need to start getting on the bike and pedaling a little bit or whatever. I'm like, it's not going to take a lot because you're clearly detrained. I'm like, maybe 20, 25 minutes every morning. Or every afternoon. I'm like, but then after 3 or 4 weeks of that, now you're going to be fitter. And now all of a sudden, more of the food that you use won't be used to like just sustain life. It'll be because your body, this is another thing that's confusing for people. Your body is a energy transformer. That's all it does. First rule of energy conservation. You can't destroy energy and you can't make energy out of nothing. So what is your body actually doing? It transforms energy from food or your own body fat into energy that your cells can use. That's all it's doing. The aerobic system is the base system that allows all of the transformations to start to happen. If you don't have that running up to par, then building muscle, losing body fat, thinking clearly, all of those things start to go out the window if you don't start to cover that one base. And having your CO2 number and your red blood cell and hemoglobin capacity numbers are the first step in figuring out fitness and why you might be tired and why you might be losing body fat as quickly as you might like. And so, yeah, those are very crucial things that a doctor would have looked at his blood work and just been like, oh, you look pretty good. And literally, that's all they would have said. and that's exactly what he told me. He's like, well,
and it's nothing against doctors because they just don't look on performance. They're like, that's right. Can you live with this? Yeah, you can. Off you go home.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And he's not the first person. Like, this is very common for normal people. It's not quite so common for athletes. I don't see this as much for athletes because they're already doing stuff, like this. But for normal
people, you're talking about like advanced athletes. It's not like someone who is just
correct. Yeah, somebody who's actually competitive. Somebody who's working to step on a powerlifting stage, a bodybuilding stage.
They value the cardiovascular work. So, funnily enough, like Andy Bolton, first man to die with 1,000 pounds. He never speaks about it, but when you actually ask him, he was always doing a lot of cardio, always.
Yes.
But even though he was like 65 kilos bodyweight. And exactly. You look at him like, there's no chance you do any cardio. But he's like, I would pedal every day. I would do this. I would do that. I would do HIIT. But not a single training session he has videoed shows that because it's boring.
Exactly. And that's the thing that you get from athletes. Yeah, that's the thing that you get from athletes. Athletes are like, I do so much shit that I don't record because it is boring. Like, who wants to watch me pedal on a bike for 20 minutes, right? And the other thing is, it's so basic, right? Like, I'm talking, this is basic, right? This is the first step in getting performance. And they've probably been doing it their whole life, right? So it's not even a bother to them, or it's not even registering that, oh yeah, I actually do cardio every single freaking day. They've probably been doing it for decades, and it's just second nature, like drinking your coffee in the morning. Yeah. And so
stuck in your habits, definitely.
So
we just keep on drinking whilst nobody drinks any water, and we just keep. I'll end up this. I'll make another one.
Yeah. Well, and that's the other thing. So right away, then the conversation led into, how am I going to get more water? How am I going to get more cardio? This guy. And so that's how I go, okay, well, what time do you wake up and what do you do in the morning? Right. So that's the first place that we started. And I go, okay, well, right away, when's the first time you take a drink? He goes, oh, probably like an hour after I've woken up. And it's probably coffee, on my way to work or on my way to the office or whatever. I go, okay,
not even just coffee. It's some latte or,
Exactly. Yep. And the first thing I say is, okay, I want you to have a glass of some kind that's pretty big, 20 ounces or bigger, and I want you to fill it up every night before you go to bed and put it somewhere where you're going to see it. It can be on your counter. It can be, leave it on your bathroom, by your bathroom sink. I'm like, and in the morning, I want you to drink half of it all right away. Like, you wake up, you go to the bathroom, as soon as you're, wash your hands or whatever, drink, 10 to 12 ounces of that. I'm like, and then, but after you get dressed, then drink the rest of it. I'm like, that way you've already drank 20 to 32 ounces of water that morning, right then and there. I'm like, you're going to start feeling way, way better right away. Like, I'm like, you may even start skipping your coffee because your cognitive thinking ability has way more to do with hydration and electrolytes than it does with coffee. Like, I don't really understand how people got confused that coffee brings cognitiveness. It doesn't. All it does is accelerate things. If your cognitiveness is already shit, it's not going to improve it. It's just going to make you more anxious and make you, feel jittery. It's not really going to improve your thinking skills. That has to do way more with like how your body and your cells are interacting with each other. Well, if they're dehydrated, which they have been, you've been asleep, right? You haven't been drinking all night. So I'm like, just start with that. He's like, okay. I'm like, and then after that, go ahead.
Bring you back to diagnostics. So we check blood
Yeah.
tests, we check your hydration levels, do you even drink water and whatnot. What would be next step you look at? Hey, this next thing, if you check it, will really show us how well you are at moment and what can be improved and what we really kind of skip over and don't need to even focus on at this point. What would be
Yes. So for men, this is specific to men, most of the time I find that their thyroid values are perfect, but I just double check two things to make sure that everything is good. And this may have to do, like, say, because a lot of people are like, oh, I lose body fat way too easy or whatnot. But the quick check on this is TSH level and free T3. You can forget about reverse T3 and free T4 because free T3 is where the rubber meets the road, and TSH is the starting mark, right? And so I like to look at the TSH and the free T3 and I think this is pretty universal as far as like the measurement, even around the world. A free T3 value of 3 or better means metabolic rate is right on par. For women, this is a crucial value because it's actually the opposite. Most men will have that. So most men don't have to worry about metabolism and thyroid values, but women are the exact opposite. I would say about 80% of the women that I deal with, and again, these are not athletic women as far as like athletes that are competing, but they are women that are professionals and stuff. I find that their thyroid values are significantly lower, and sometimes I can clearly be like, okay, if we improve this, you're gonna clearly improve your ability to burn body fat and your ability to sustain energy and stuff like that. For them, I find that it's usually because they're burning morning hours in front of a screen like this and evening hours in front of the screen like this, and that is very counterproductive to your circadian rhythm. And thyroid specifically is tied to your circadian rhythm. That's the thing that wakes you up in the morning. That's the thing that makes you feel hot and you get uncomfortable if you sleep in. I'm sure you've tried to do that before. Like as soon as like 6 a.m. hits for me, my body gets hot and I'm like, oh, I got to be awake. That's your T3 value.
Yeah, if you throw in L-carnitines, then it's like a
It's even worse. Yep. And so anyway, T4 is manufactured in the evening, but the only way, and then during the night in the early hours, that's when T4 is turned into T3. Knowing that, you have to understand, like people may even know that, but they don't know why. Like, why is your body making T4 in the evening, or how does it do that? And it has to do with your lighting environment. So if you're always under fake lighting in the evening when the sun's gone down, your body doesn't understand that it's nighttime. So how is it supposed to make a nighttime hormone, right? So you got to start to get a little bit clued into where you're at on the planet, and essentially just, hey, if the sun has gone down, try to limit your light exposure. And then when the sun comes up, maximize your sun exposure. So right now, the sun for me is just barely coming up. And so I'm perfectly fine turning on all my lights, having my computers on. But before I hopped on this call, the very first thing I did was go outside. The reason is because I want to let my body know what time of day is it. Because the sun is literally coming up just now. So 30, 40 minutes before this, you could see the sunrise is going to happen, right? And your body is very, very, very good at cueing into all of that type of stuff. just by being exposed to it. So all I did was simply get my coffee and my water and step out on my back porch for 10, 15 minutes. And then I came in here. And immediately when I walked back in here, I was wide awake. Like my body already understood, hey, it's morning time. It's time to rock and roll. And really the reason why I drank the coffee is just because it's delicious. Right. Like I didn't drink it because it makes me feel better or anything. It's just, hey, I have a protein powder that tastes really good. And it goes in the coffee. It's a good soothing drink to drink, not because of the cognitive effect. And so that's the next thing, the thyroid values. And then the thing after that I like to look for is the D3 value. So vitamin D. The reason for that is because that is tied to a lot of immunological things. So like just preserving health in general, preserving immune system function. We could go on and on just because of the whole COVID thing, because everybody's been focusing on vitamin D and all that type of stuff. But it's true, I mean, modern life makes it so that you get a lot less sunlight exposure. So it's one of those things where you do want to double check it. And I'm being serious, out of right around 800 people that I've reviewed their blood work, only 10 have had acceptable vitamin D values, and they were taking vitamin D. Yeah. So it's one of those things where it's like, hey, if you're not taking vitamin D, it's probably the only thing that I can confidently say without blood work that I recommend to people that just ask me random information and random help. I'm like, hey, are you taking vitamin D? And they go, no, I'm not. I'm like, okay, start with 2,000 units. Like I can pretty much default tell people, anybody, if you're not taking vitamin D, start with about 2,000 units. You're not going to regret it. That may not be enough. So some people I've seen the vitamin D values so low that I was like, how are you still alive? Like seriously, I was shocked. I was like, wow, that is bad. And coincidentally, this is a female. She had 3 miscarriages in 1 year. She couldn't get pregnant very well. Her menstrual cycle was literally sometimes 6 months long before she would have another period, even though she was technically normal. Doctors didn't really know what to do or anything. And I look at her vitamin D value, and I was like, wow, this is terrible. This is literally the lowest vitamin D value I've ever seen.
But this is the reason why I wanted to pull this up, that people feel the same all the time, and they think this is how good feels like.
Exactly.
They don't understand that they don't feel good. For them, this is great.
Yes, that's right. Long story short, 6-7 months after taking vitamin D, she was able to get pregnant. She's still pregnant, so no miscarriage yet. But it had everything to do with her vitamin D value. And we had to get aggressive with her because it was so low. I was like, wow, I'm not really sure how you're alive, but you are. And so she had to take 20,000 units of vitamin D every day, plus 150,000 unit injection once a week. And after 6 weeks, then her vitamin D level was nice and high in the premium range. And I was like, okay, cool. Just stay on a maintenance dose of 5,000 units and you'll start feeling better in a month or two. Sure enough, she's like, yeah, I do feel better. It's ridiculous. She's like, and one of the things that she, just like you said, was kind of used to, but she didn't really realize that was bad, was she felt fragile. She felt like her bones were a little bit achy and just kind of like almost like permanently sore. Her bones, not her muscle. I'm like, oh, and then she's like, I noticed that went away. I'm like, well, that's a good thing. That's really good. And it's just one of those things that she had lived with for so long, and she didn't understand that was a clear sign to look into things.
Exactly. And that's why I said we would be good to just pull up, hey, what are the basic things that you can look into to even understand where you're at? Because more often than not, we are so used to the environment we live in and how we feel that we think this is great. Yeah. More often than not, it isn't.
No, it isn't. Yeah. And then the next thing that I look at is 3 values. And this is for insulin resistance, and just to see how good you are at, because everybody's into like, hey, do you have to do keto, or do you have to do, you know what I mean? Like every diet in the world. Yeah. I'm like, well,
this works the best for me, and this works the best for me. And to me, it's like, it works the best for you because your physiology is geared up for that approach, but you can change it. It's not it's just working for you. It's working for your type of activity levels and all those kind of things. And when you start changing those, you can change the nutritional approach and everything.
That's right. That's right. And so the very first thing I want to see is your glucose value. That's pretty easy. That's on most panels that everybody gets, but it doesn't tell you the whole picture. But so glucose value, A1C, and insulin. So ideally you get all three of these fasted, and then that will start to tell you big time on like how easily you process glucose. So the glucose value is literally your blood sugar value. And then the insulin value, if you take those both fasted, starts to tell you this: hey, if your glucose is normal, like in the 80s or so, as far as like glucose value, it's probably a different range in other countries. But if your glucose is in the optimal range and your insulin is a little bit on the upper end of the range, that's the first sign of, hey, you're working a little bit harder to manage that blood sugar because your insulin is at the upper range. More often than not with athletes, what I see is their glucose value will be in the optimal range and their insulin value is at the lower end of the range because it doesn't take very much insulin to manage their glucose. So that's literally insulin resistance. The more insulin you have to use to manage your glucose, you are more insulin resistant. So that is literally looking at insulin resistance if you know how to.
And whilst you're at it, just to improve that, go for a walk. Do your cardio.
Exactly. Yep, exactly. So it dovetails back into the basics of, hey, if you have good cardiovascular system, you handle glucose better. And so then that automatically, if I look at somebody and their glucose and insulin values are perfect and they're asking me about keto, I'm like, no. Just go on a normal, prioritize good quality carbohydrates. You're going to have more energy. You're going to be able to work harder. Your body can clearly handle these. Where it's the opposite. If I see somebody with clear insulin resistance, absolutely, we're going to take away some carbs because your body doesn't know how to use them. And then we start looking back into, hey, what are you doing for daily activity? What are you doing for this and that, as far as like aerobic work and helping your body start to manage glucose better. That can be as simple as, hey, let's introduce a little bit of cardio with a little bit of metformin. Let's check back in this in 6 weeks or so and see what this looks like then. If it looks different, then hey, guess what? Now you can start eating carbohydrates better, and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So that's
exactly what's covered here.
Yes.
Get on this
yes.
and make sure you do everything to improve your life rather than taking away from enjoyment of life by never eating carbs again or whatever.
That's right, because the goal isn't to get you pigeonholed into some weird diet that you can't really follow very well. The goal is, hey, let's get you being able to eat pretty much normal and not suffer anything, right? And that automatically starts to dovetail, hey, if I can eat normal and I'm feeling great, well, I'm probably going to work out better. I'm probably going to feel better. I'm probably going to have more energy. And now you can focus on putting that energy into the things that matter to you, your business or whatever. I'm talking about fitness athletes and stuff like that, but it doesn't have to be that. You tick a couple boxes here and there, and now you have your time and your energy to focus on your business or focus on whatever else that you have to do. And then lastly, the very last thing I look at is cholesterol values. So most people have this backwards. That's like the first thing they look at.
Always off, and you're like, dude.
Yeah. And so, and really, honestly, the only real value that I look at in the cholesterol values is your HDL. I'm going to give everybody a little hint. I actually don't really like this marker for cardiovascular health as much as I like these other two values that I'm going to tell you right now. And that is your C-reactive protein. So that gives you general inflammation in the cardiac system, and omega-3 index. The omega-3 index is crucial because that is tied more closely in meta-analysis than HDL or any other cholesterol value with not having a cardiovascular event. So in other words, I'll rephrase it a little bit. If your omega-3 index is higher than a 6 on the index, ideally somewhere close to an 8, you are, I think they stated 40 to 30% less likely for the next 20 years to have a cardiovascular event than anything correlated with your HDL or LDL or any of those. If your omega-3 index is above 6, you are 30% less likely to suffer any cardiovascular event.
And that would usually be separate test, wouldn't it?
Yes, in the United States, they've recently started like labs that private labs have started offering that to be able to be put right on your cholesterol panel. But doctors they are not aware of that very much.
Yeah.
Because
they look for performance. They look if everything is in check, and they obviously follow what they taught to, because there's only so much you're going to learn. You're a bloody doctor. You need to deal with everything.
right.
Yeah. Specific as yourself and myself, we do. But these are very helpful. So, is there anything else you would say that can improve their health straight away by just looking at it? Hey, we change this little habit or this little market or whatnot, and you will be 10 times better within weeks.
Yes, I will. So having covered all of those things, okay, now let's distill it to, okay, cool. I looked at those. There may be, each one of them may be a little bit off. And I go, okay, so here's the game. Here's the game plan, right? I already stated one at the beginning there, which was, let's get more water, start early, okay? Secondly, get daylight in the morning and then the evening, or outside exposure. Lastly, let's get some cardiovascular work. As little as 20 minutes every day is perfect. And if the less fit you are, the less time it'll take. The more fit you are. When you talk
about cardiovascular work, what would be defined for you as minimum threshold to be classed as cardiovascular work?
Yeah, so I would say 120 beats per minute all the way up to 140 beats per minute. Most people will be surprised to how low that is. It doesn't take that much to get your
for me, it would be uphill walk.
Yeah, literally. And for somebody that's not as fit as you, it literally would be just walk around your neighborhood, right? And so everybody has a fancy watch of some kind, I'm sure. And so it's very easy to be like, oh yeah, my beats are at 125. Perfect. You keep it there for 20 minutes, you've done your cardiovascular work for the day. And then the key is consistency in all of these things. Try to put them in places that you will habitually do every day. And then lastly, if you're not taking any fish oil pill, this goes back to that last cardiovascular marker that I talked about, the omega-3 index. If you're not taking a fish oil pill of at least 2 to 3 grams of fish oil per day, that would be the last step. So that kind of summarizes everything that I just talked about.
With your fish oils, would you time it in specific time of the day, or as long as you get them in?
No, I wouldn't. You don't need to. It's just habit. Hey, where do you normally take some pills or something? And I would just put them there. For me, it's at night because that's where I take most of my stuff anyway. So I just take my fish oil at night. My wife literally is on the opposite end. She takes everything in the morning. So that's because that's her habit, right? And so she'll just take her omega-3 or fatty acid pills in the morning. And then lastly, try to at least eat 1 to 2 meals a week that are seafood based. That will accelerate how much the omega-3s get uptaken, because there's cofactors with real food, right? There's zinc, there's minerals, there's, you can't replace real food. So it's one of those things.
This is why your macros are only getting you so far, because we still don't know a lot about how food interactions actually affect our body, but people think, oh, I'm going to count my protein, carbs, and fats. Yes, that's great. But with real food, you're still going to get further than with supplement.
Absolutely. I see that our time's going to run out. So let's jump in and off, and then we'll do an outro.
This is great. Short video, run it over, and we're going to carry on next week and do these weekly until we get to the point where people understand, hey, I can do all these things and improve my life drastically.
I love it. Yeah, I love it, man.
So thanks for your time.
Okay.